Hello! We have one longer story today from the ancient archives of Reddit that has recently been collated and reposted by the hardworking people over at Best of Redditor Updates. Our story, originally from TalesFromTechSupport, details what happened when one boss decides he's too important to respect his employees' days off. This boss goes so far it scares even the higher-ups into action. All the while this one lowly system admin decides to sit back, sip his tea, and watch the chaos as his phone rings and rings and rings. Story 1. So this one goes back to 99 or so. I was working in the corporate headquarters of a very large telco, responsible for the email system for headquarters, about 1,100 users at the time. Like all the sysadmins at headquarters, I was a contractor working through a body shop outsourcer. My boss was a guy I'll call S. S was the site manager for the outsourcer and was the direct manager of all the contractor sysadmins. The customer contact was a guy I'll call J. J was what they called an IT planner, basically a systems architect. He had dotted line responsibility over all the sysadmins, including me. I also had a backup there, who I'll call B. B was a competent sysadmin, capable of handling most day-to-day stuff. We normally kept staff in the office from 8 to 6 on workdays, with an on-call rotation for certain specialty areas, including email. Back then, we carried a pager. Yes, an old-school beeper for on-call duty. My on-call rotation was 1 week on, 1 week off. This story happened in my off week when B carried the pager. One Saturday night at around 3:30 a.m., my home phone rang. My wife answered, and it was J calling. She grumpily handed the phone to me. Now, my wife and I had just gotten home, having been out for much of the night with our neighbors. I was, for lack of a more refined term, positively hammered at this point. Jay informed me that there was an email outage and that I needed to remote in and get it back up immediately, and then drive to the office to start a root cause analysis. I informed him that I was in no condition to drive, let alone touch a production rig, and asked what B told him when he called the on-call pager. Jay told me that he didn't call the on-call pager because this was way too serious of a problem to trust the backup sysadmin. He wanted me working on this, and that if I can't be relied upon to do my job when I was needed, he'd find someone else who could, and hung up the phone. I went back to sleep. The next morning, I had an email from B telling me that Jay had called him at home rather than paging the on-call rotation. It was a very simple issue. Our backup software glitched and started writing out hundreds of gigabytes of temp files, which filled up a critical volume on our production email server. Temp files deleted, email services restarted, problem kicked over to our backup software subject matter expert to figure out what happened. Total downtime after B got the call was about 15 minutes. The next day, I arrived at the office to a note from S, my manager, asking me to come see him ASAP. I went to S's office, and sitting there was Jay, who was in the process of demanding that I be fired immediately for being drunk at work. From there, the conversation went something like this. But Blumpglorf wasn't at work. He was at home and wasn't in the on-call rotation this weekend. I don't want to hear about the on-call rotation. Blumpglorf needs to be ready to work when I tell him to. I can't rely on an alcoholic, and I want him gone. If he's not on call, he's free to do whatever he wants with his time. Not as long as he works for me. Jay then demands that I hand my office badge to him and calls security from S's phone to have me escorted out of the building. I'm in absolute disbelief at this point. S gets up and goes off to points unknown just as security arrives to see me out to the parking lot. As I'm driving off, I see Jay's boss. I'll call her M. M is running across the street to the parking lot. Strange, but I was more focused on how the heck I was going to explain this to my wife when I got home. I got home and my wife was sitting on the couch just absolutely livid. Now, this was really weird because I hadn't told her what happened yet. Those mother lovers fired you? I'm confused as all heck at this point. My wife told me that M called her and that I need to call her back as soon as possible. Come to find out, when S had went off, he was going to M's office to explain the situation and keep him from terminating me. M heard from S and freaked out. When I saw her running across the street, she was trying to catch me in the parking lot before I left to tell me to come back in. When M couldn't find my car, she went back into the office and called the house, intending to leave me a voicemail, but got my wife instead. M told my wife what had happened, promised to rein J in, and asked her to tell me to come back into the office to sort it out. So I let them stew for a while. M called about 20 minutes after I got home. We let her go to the machine. S called as well, just as my wife and I went out to get some lunch. Over lunch, my wife and I talked about how we would handle this. Largely for financial reasons, we decided to talk to them to see if we could work this out. We got back home to 3 more voicemails from M and S. About 30 seconds after we walked in the door, the phone rang again. This time, it was Jay, obviously on speakerphone. Jay apologized to me and asked me to come back to work the next day. I agreed, but as he hung up, I could hear M say to him, "Jay, you're a bloody idiot." I worked there for another year after that before another Jay screw-up made me leave once and for all. That was a whole nother story. Relevant comments. Please tell me you got something other than 1 day off paid for this. OP. I wish I could tell you that, but I can't because I didn't. I got my job back. That was about it. After several requests, OP posts the story about him quitting. In my last post, I shared the story of how I got fired in a huff by someone who, to put it diplomatically, overestimated his own authority, only for my termination to be rescinded by his manager a few hours later when she found out about it. This one is the follow-up, set a year later, and is the story of how I finally ended up quitting that job. Cast of characters. Me. I was a lead sysadmin at a very large telco responsible for the email system at the corporate headquarters. I was a contractor there, which will become relevant to the story later. Jim, Jay in my last story, an IT architect at a large telco. Jim was my primary customer contact until he flew off the handle and tried to fire me under circumstances that were dubious at best. Jim was a pretty smart technical guy who was also a bull in a china shop who shouldn't have been allowed to work around other people. Lynn, not in the previous story. Lynn is the IT architect who I was assigned to work with after Jim screwed the pooch in my previous story. She was awesome, for reasons that will become clear soon. She reported to Jim and utterly loathed him. Marie, M in the previous story. Jim's boss, the IT department manager. She cleared everything after Jim fired me. In early 2000, I got a phone call at home from an IT recruiter. This wasn't uncommon at all. I had at one point or another interacted with half the sleazy recruitment agencies in my city. This call was a little bit different. It was from an in-house recruiter for a tech company, a company that was one of the shining stars of tech where I lived, with a reputation for not only having solid technology in their market, but also being a great place to work. They were an honest-to-goodness unicorn, back before anyone called them that. The conversation went something like this. The recruiter said, "Hi, Blemklorf. This is Recruiter with a cool tech company. How are you today?" "Doing well, thanks. What can I do for you?" "Blemklorf, I'm calling because Lynn gave me a copy of your resume and suggested that I reach out to you about a position we have open." A standard HR introductory call followed, where I found out that they were looking for a lead Windows sysadmin for their internal IT department. Now, this confused the bejesus out of me because Lynn was my lead, albeit through a dotted line. Let that sink in. My boss sent my resume to a recruiter without my knowledge or permission. Obviously, this was something that warranted further investigation. So I called Lynn. Apparently, she had just interviewed at Cool Tech Company and didn't get the job. On the thanks but no thanks call from HR, she told the recruiter something to the effect of, "Well, that's too bad, but I know someone else you need to talk to. Blemklorf is better at this stuff than me, and I think he'd love working at Cool Tech Company." And then she sent over my resume, which she had from when she referred me for an internal hire job in another division of the telco we both worked at. When I asked her why she did that, she just said, "You have to trust me on this one. I can't say more." So I had a phone interview with the hiring manager at Cool Tech Company, and he and I meshed well. And he decided to bring me in for the full gauntlet interview with the rest of the sysadmin team there. Around this time, I got a meeting request from Jim, who I hadn't really interacted with a lot since the time he tried and failed to toss me out. At the meeting, Jim informed me that Telco had decided to insource all the contract sysadmins and bring them on as direct Telco employees. He had an offer letter waiting for me at the meeting. I opened the offer letter only to discover that it was a 20% pay cut from what I was earning as a contractor for the same job. There was a slight bump in terms of benefits value. The 401k match was superior, but at first glance, it was obvious that this was a pay hit no matter how you added it up. Jim also informed me that this wasn't optional, that the insourcing was going to happen whether I liked it or not, and that this was a take it or leave it offer. Not only would this be a pay cut, but I would also be reporting directly to Jim, as would all the other newly insourced sysadmins on the team. Either one of those would be deal breakers, but I kept my mouth shut knowing his history. I caught up with Lynn a few minutes later. She took one look at my face and knew what had just happened. "This is why I told you to trust me," she said before I even said a word. I could have kissed her. So, a couple of weeks later, I went in for the full interview at Cool Tech Company. It resulted in an offer that would have been a no-brainer to accept, even if I hadn't just had my pay cut. I received that offer just before the planned effective date of the insourcing and pay hit. The next day, I walked into Lynn's cube and let her know that I'd gotten the job. She got this look of utter delight on her face and said to me, "You have to let me be there when you tell Jim." So we walked over to his office together and told him. He looked absolutely floored, and as he usually did when he didn't get his way, he immediately went into argument mode. "All the other sysadmins took the job." True, but 2 others quit within the first 2 months because they didn't have the head start on their job search that I did. "You're making a big mistake." And why would that be? "Do you think that little company is going to last?" They did. The problem was that because of the planned insourcing, there was no mechanism to continue to pay me past the end of that week, as Telco's contract with the outsourcer was expiring. Enter Marie. Marie was Jim's boss, who I had a great relationship with. Now, I felt genuinely bad about this. IT operations at corporate headquarters was her responsibility. So this left her with not only no email server support, but only a day to figure out how to ensure continuity. Had quit for unrelated reasons a month before. I was perfectly willing to give 2 weeks' notice per custom, mind you. They just didn't have a straightforward way to pay me for it. So, Marie called me into her office after Jim had left for the day. I told her that I was already in the interview process at the time Jim gave me the offer. This was true, although I left out the whole part about Lynn. And the fact that it was just such a big pay cut made it a no-brainer to continue the process. Marie had an utterly stunned look on her face, and she said to me, "Pay cut? You all were supposed to be kept at parity." What I found out later, through my mole Lynn, was that Jim neglected to relay that instruction to company HR when they were preparing the offer letters. They prepared the offers at what HR deemed to be market rate, which in this case was a substantial pay hit. I never found out if he did that on purpose, but given that he'd complained in the past that he thought we were overpaid for what we did, I'd be willing to hazard a guess that he did. Anyway, even though Marie upped the offer to match my current pay rate and promised that I'd be reporting to her given my past history with Jim, so much for take it or leave it, I still declined as my new job had a lot more long-term opportunity. I ended up taking the job at the telco, just long enough to work out my notice period. HR was very confused at my exit interview when they noticed that I'd been with the company for only 9 working days. Incidentally, I ended up staying at Cool Tech Company for over 8 years. It was the best career move I ever made. My only regret about it was that I was never able to get Lynn a job there. On the other hand, Marie stepped in and took away all of Jim's supervisory responsibility over the sysadmins, sticking him in a strict technical role. He lasted a few months after that and bailed out to a much smaller company. In the comments, Stoke King said, "The IT world is blessed with more than its fair share of jumped-up idiots, people like Jim." I remember one of the higher-ups from one of our larger clients ringing me to ask me a technical question. He didn't like my answer at all. He complained I was incompetent. I was clueless and didn't know what I was doing. He demanded I get more training in this particular piece of software. After much more complaining and toing and froing, my boss explained that I wrote that software from the ground up and asked where I might get the training he was so insistent on. So good. He hated me from that day forward, and I always made sure to charge a stupidity tax on any work that had anything to do with him. Screw you, Jim, and all the other Jims in this world. Mamba Poa replied, "Jumped up idiot men, Jims." Idiot Platypus added, "We call them jackhammers. Giant tools that think they're important because they're so dang loud. Distinct Inspector said, so often in your working life you meet a Jim, but every now and then you run into a Lynn. I know which one I'd rather be. Golden Mandala replied, yes, let's all try to be Lynns. Tarkanal Florida added, I'm actually a far pettier, deranged woman. All? Don't presume to speak for me. I strive to be a Jim. I wallow in it. Every spare moment I am limbering up my morals and strengthening my core obstinacy so that I can be a better gymnast. For whatever reason, it seems to be a good career move. I don't know. And ain't that true? These jumped up idiot men tend to just skip rungs on the corporate ladders. Up and up and up they go. But what a delight Lynn is. What a huge impact having someone in your corner can have, eh? It's corny, but if we all just bought into paying it forward, the world would be a better place. Good deeds galore. I think I'm going to have to add Jim to my arsenal of insults, though. That's my takeaway from this story. It sounds like you mistook someone's name when you're really calling them an idiot. It's too brilliant to go unused. I may just know a few Jims myself, but don't we all? And that's it for today. Until next time, shine bright, Starlight. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.